My name is Eleanor Parker, and I am 78 years old. I used to believe my heart had grown strong enough to weather every storm life could send my way. I had buried a husband far too early, raised a daughter on my own, and spent 3 decades teaching little ones in a small elementary school in Charleston, South Carolina. I thought I had already endured the worst. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the moment when my only child looked me in the eye and said the words that shattered me. Before we dive into family betrayal, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. It happened on a winter evening, with rain tapping softly against the window panes. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and fresh herbs. I had set the table with the old blue-patterned dishes I'd saved from my younger years. Across the table sat my daughter Rachel and her husband Tom. I had worked all afternoon on a simple meal, including the chicken stew Rachel used to love as a little girl. I had hoped it would feel like old times, comforting, familiar, safe, but instead the air was heavy, thick with tension I could not quite cut through. Rachel's voice was sharp, her eyes cold, and then she said it words that pierced me deeper than any knife ever could. "From now on, you are no longer my mother. You're dead to me." The clatter of a spoon falling onto a plate was the only sound that followed. My hands trembled in my lap. I could hardly breathe. I stared at my daughter, the child I had poured my entire soul into raising, and I saw nothing of the little girl who once clung to my skirt, begging me not to leave her on the first day of school. My heart cracked wide open that night. Outside, the rain began to pound harder, a relentless rhythm against the glass. Tom lowered his gaze, saying nothing. And me? I sat there silent, swallowing the bitterness that rose in my throat. There are words, dear friends, that once spoken cannot be taken back. They leave scars that never fully heal. And I wonder, what would you do if your child looked you in the eye and told you that you were dead to them? Would you shout back? Would you collapse into tears? Or would you sit in silence as I did, letting the weight of those words press down until you felt smaller than you ever thought possible? I will be honest, I had no answer that night. When Rachel slammed the door on her way out, I stayed at the table long after the candles burned low. The flickering light threw long shadows across the wall, and in that silence, her words echoed like a life sentence. But here is the part Rachel never knew. Only a short time later, when the lawyer read my will aloud to the family, the very words she once hurled at me in anger would come back to her in a way that would change her life forever. That room would fall silent again, but this time it would be a silence filled with shock, disbelief, and the collapse of all her expectations. So before I continue with what happened next, let me ask you something. Imagine your own son or daughter saying those words to you. "You're dead to me." What would you do? Would you find the strength to forgive, or would those words build a wall between you and your child that could never be torn down? Take a moment to think about it, and if you feel like sharing, leave a comment below. Sometimes your story, your truth, can be the very thing that helps someone else realize the value of family before it's too late. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. When people see an older woman like me, they often imagine a quiet life, a steady rhythm of tea in the morning, knitting in the afternoon, and early evenings with a good book. But behind my silver hair and the wrinkles time carved into my skin lies a lifetime of choices, sacrifices, and dreams deferred. And at the center of it all was one person, my daughter Rachel. I became a widow far too soon. My husband Mark was only 49 when a heart attack stole him from us. Rachel had just turned 15. She was tall for her age, with dark hair that she often wore in a messy ponytail. The night Mark died, she came into my room and crawled into my bed like she had when she was little, her face pressed against my shoulder. "Don't leave me too, Mama," she whispered. And in that moment, I made her a promise I would carry the weight of 2 parents on my shoulders. I would be both mother and father, protector and provider. From that night forward, everything I did revolved around her. I went back to teaching full-time, took on extra tutoring in the evenings, and even worked weekends now and then. I patched together every penny to make sure Rachel could have opportunities I never did. When her friends bought new clothes from fancy boutiques, I stayed up late at the sewing machine, turning old fabric into something stylish enough for her to wear without shame. I skipped vacations, new furniture, and even dental work just to keep her in music lessons because she loved the piano, and I couldn't bear to let that love slip away. Looking back now, I realize that my devotion was as fierce as it was blinding. I thought if I poured enough love, enough sacrifice into her, she would always feel the depth of it. I thought she would always remember that her mama carried her through the darkest years. But time has a way of shifting things. When Rachel left for college, I felt a pang of pride and an emptiness that nearly swallowed me whole. I worked 2 jobs that year just to cover her tuition after the scholarship fell short. I remember mailing her care packages, tucking in little notes that said things like, "Don't forget you're loved," or "I'm proud of you no matter what." Her calls came less often, and when they did, her tone grew brisk, distracted. She was chasing something bigger out there in the world, and I didn't blame her. Isn't that what I wanted? But slowly, I began to notice a change. By the time Rachel married Tom Whitaker, she was no longer the girl who whispered in my arms on the night her father died. Tom was polished, ambitious, and came from a family that measured worth in assets and status. He never said it outright, but I could feel his quiet disapproval of me. My old Charleston home with its creaky floors and worn shutters seemed to embarrass him. He'd make little comments at dinner, things like, "This neighborhood has potential if the right investors stepped in," or "Property values are wasted on houses that haven't been updated since the 70s. Rachel began to echo his thoughts. She'd tell me I should sell the house, move into a smaller condo, and hand her the difference to invest. She argued it was practical, that it would secure her future. I listened, trying to stay calm, but inside I felt something twist. This house wasn't just wood and nails. It was the place where I rocked her to sleep, where her father planted azaleas by the porch, where every corner whispered the story of our family. Each time I resisted, Rachel grew sharper. "You don't understand money, Mom," she'd say. "You're stuck in the past. Don't you want me to succeed?" Her words stung more than she realized. After all, wasn't my whole life proof of how badly I wanted her to succeed? And yet I stayed silent. For years I swallowed my hurt. I told myself she was just busy, that she didn't mean to sound ungrateful. I reminded myself of the little girl who once cried at the thought of losing me. But silence has its limits. The tension between us simmered year after year until that winter evening at my dining table when the heat of it finally boiled over. Her words, "You're dead to me," were not born in a single moment of anger. They were the sharp edge of years of growing distance, of unspoken resentment, of values pulling us further apart. I wish I could tell you I saw it coming. I wish I could say I prepared myself for the day when love could turn into rejection so swiftly. But the truth is, I was blindsided. No matter how much you give, how much you sacrifice, you still believe deep down that your child will always see you as their anchor, their home. That night proved me wrong. And yet, as I sat there in the ruins of that conversation, a small flame of resolve flickered inside me. I did not know it then, but it would shape the choice I made in the days to come, a choice that would leave Rachel stunned, Tom speechless, and an entire community forever changed. It was a Sunday afternoon in late spring, when the jasmine vines outside my porch were just beginning to bloom, that Rachel came by unannounced. I had been sitting at the kitchen table with my ledger open, carefully recording a donation I had promised to a small scholarship program downtown. The program wasn't large, just a modest effort that provided funds for bright but underprivileged high school seniors who dreamed of college. It was something I had started quietly using the savings Mark and I had once put aside for retirement trips we never got to take. The scratch of my pen against paper stopped when I heard her voice calling from the front door. "Mom, you home." Rachel stepped inside with Tom following closely behind. He was in his usual pressed shirt, not a wrinkle in sight, his cologne strong enough to announce him before his words did. Rachel gave me a brief hug, but her mind was elsewhere. She glanced around the house as though seeing it not as a home, but as an untapped opportunity. "Mom," she began, pulling out a chair at the table, "we need to talk about the house. I closed the ledger quickly, tucking it beneath a stack of mail. "What about the house?" "You're sitting on a fortune," Tom chimed in smoothly, as if he had rehearsed the line. "This neighborhood is prime real estate. If you sell now, you could walk away with millions. Rachel and I could put that money into properties that actually generate income." I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. "This house is not just a piece of property," I replied quietly. "It's our family home. Your father built these shelves with his own hands. I raised you here, Rachel." She sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Mom, it's just a house. Walls, floors, a roof. Don't you want to see me and Tom succeed? Don't you want to know your sacrifice wasn't wasted?" Her words cut deeper than she realized. All those years of sewing dresses, tutoring children after long school days, skipping meals so she could attend summer camps, it all rushed back like a flood. Wasn't every bit of that sacrifice already proof of my love and hope for her? I looked at Rachel, her face carefully, painted her nails polished a shade of crimson that seemed foreign compared to the little girl who once ran barefoot through the marshes. She couldn't see the house as I did, filled with echoes of bedtime stories, the scent of pancakes on Saturday mornings, the sound of Mark's laughter carried down the hallway. "No," I said firmly, surprising even myself. "This house is not for sale." The room chilled. Tom shifted uncomfortably, then pressed on. "Eleanor, think about your age. Maintaining this place must be a burden. You could move into something smaller easier. Why not make the smart choice while you still can?" "I have thought about it," I replied. "And my choice is to stay." Rachel's eyes hardened. She gathered her purse, stood up, and muttered, "You're impossible." Then she stormed out, Tom trailing behind her, though not before giving me a look that felt half pity, half disdain. When the door slammed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands trembled as I reached for the ledger again. The scholarship program's ledger, the one part of my life Rachel knew nothing about. I flipped back to the entry I had been writing before they arrived. $2,000 pledged to the Parker Scholars Fund. The name still made me smile. It wasn't an official foundation yet, just a name scribbled on a bank account I had opened quietly, with the lawyer David Morales guiding me. David had been a friend of Mark's, a man who knew my heart and understood my wish to give something lasting. Every month I set aside a portion of my savings. I met with students whose eyes lit up when they spoke of becoming nurses, teachers, engineers. Many came from families who could barely afford groceries, let alone college tuition. To me, they were proof that love, when shared, could multiply into futures far beyond my own. It was a secret, yes, but it was a joyful one, a counterbalance to the bitterness of my strained relationship with Rachel. Still, I could not shake the sting of her words that day. The way she dismissed the house, the history, and if I was honest, me. She saw me as a stumbling block, not a mother. That night, as I walked through the halls of the old house, I ran my hands over the worn banister, the pictures lining the walls. There was Rachel at 5, grinning with a missing tooth. Rachel at 12, standing proudly beside her science fair project. Rachel at 20, tossing her graduation cap into the air. Every photo was a reminder that I had once been her whole world, how quickly the world can shift. In the days that followed, Rachel called less, and when she did, her words were clipped. Always about business, about opportunities, about how everyone else her age was building wealth. Never about me, never about the house, never about love. And somewhere in the quiet of those weeks, I felt something inside me harden. Not bitterness, not yet, but a kind of resolve. I had spent my life giving, bending, sacrificing. Perhaps it was time I stood firm. I didn't know it then, but that visit, Rachel standing in my kitchen telling me my home was nothing more than walls and floors, was the moment the story shifted. The fracture in our bond widened, and the path toward the final confrontation, the reading of the will, began to take shape. The summer that followed was hotter than I remembered in years past. Charleston summers are always heavy, the kind of heat that clings to your skin, but that year it felt different. It wasn't just the humidity, it was me. My body, after carrying me faithfully for nearly 8 decades, had begun to tire. There were mornings when climbing the staircase left me breathless. Nights when my heart pounded so loudly, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning its slow circles above. At first I told myself it was age. Everyone slows down eventually. But deep down, I knew it was more. Something inside was failing quietly but insistently. I tried not to let Rachel see, not that she was around often. Her visits had grown fewer, her calls shorter. Always hurried, always distracted. When she did appear, it was usually with Tom, and the conversation circled back to money, to investments, to what she called making smarter choices. Never about how I was feeling, never about whether I was lonely. One afternoon, she breezed into the house with a folder of real estate listings under her arm. "Mom, look at this condo downtown," she said brightly, sliding the glossy photos across the kitchen table. "It's modern, secure, and you wouldn't have to worry about upkeep. You'd love it." I studied the photo. The place was beautiful, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. But it had no soul. No porch swing where Mark once read the newspaper. No creaky floors echoing with Rachel's childhood laughter. No azalea bushes planted by hands that now rested beneath the soil of Magnolia Cemetery. I pushed the folder back toward her. "Rachel, I told you, I'm not selling." Her smile cracked, irritation flashing in her eyes. "Why are you being so stubborn? You're not getting any younger. What good is this old place going to do you when you can't even walk up the stairs?" Her words hit harder than she knew. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. The gap between us had grown into a canyon too wide for either of us to cross that day. Within weeks, my body betrayed me further. A dizzy spell sent me tumbling on the front steps, and though I laughed it off when a neighbor rushed over to help me inside, I felt a tremor of fear. It was the kind of moment that whispers time is shorter than you think. I called David Morales, the lawyer, the very next day. It's time I told him. David had known Mark since college. He'd sat at our table many times, his deep laugh filling the room. Over the years, he became not just a lawyer, but a confidant, a steady presence. He listened quietly as I laid out my wishes, nodding, never interrupting. "I want it in writing, David," I said firmly. "Every penny of my estate, every brick of this house, it all goes to the Parker Scholars Fund. Not a dime to Rachel." His brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. "Are you certain, Eleanor?" "It's a heavy decision." I closed my eyes for a moment. I could still hear Rachel's voice echoing from that night. "You're dead to me." "Yes," I whispered. "I am certain. If my daughter once declared me dead in her eyes, then let her carry that truth forward. My legacy will live where it matters in young lives, not in her bank account." David slid the papers across the desk. My hand trembled slightly as I signed, but my heart felt strangely steady. It was as if for the first time in years I was standing on solid ground. Not long after my health declined sharply, doctors mentioned words like heart failure, congestive progressive. Their voices blurred together. I didn't fear dying. I feared unfinished business. But with the will signed, the house cared for, and the scholarship secure, I felt an odd peace. Rachel did not come often in those final weeks. She called once or twice, her tone clipped, asking if I'd considered her offer about the condo. I told her no. She sighed, muttered something about me being difficult, and hung up. I don't remember the last time she said I love you. When the end came, it was quiet. I drifted to sleep one humid evening with the sound of crickets outside the window, and I did not wake again. The funeral was held at the old church downtown, the one with white columns and pews worn smooth by generations of worshipers. The sanctuary smelled faintly of lilies and candle wax. Former students, neighbors, even strangers whose children had received quiet help from me over the years came to pay respects. Rachel arrived late, dressed sharply in black tom at her side. Her eyes were red, though I could not tell if it was grief or exhaustion. She stood stiffly during the hymns, her gaze fixed forward, never downward. After the service, David approached the family. "We will gather tomorrow afternoon for the reading of the will," he said. His voice carried weight, calm and unshakable. Rachel nodded, her lips pressed thin. I could almost hear her thoughts. Finally, the estate, the house, the money. The next day, the Parker home was filled with relatives, a few close friends, and Rachel seated proudly at the head of the dining table where it had all begun. David sat opposite her, a leather folder before him. The air was taut with expectation. David cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began. "My name is David Morales. I was entrusted by the late Eleanor Parker to execute her final wishes. This is the reading of her will." He spoke first of small bequests, keepsakes left to nieces, a few personal items set aside for longtime neighbors. Rachel fidgeted, impatient, waiting for the part that mattered to her. Then David's voice grew firmer, resonant. "To my daughter Rachel Parker, he read who once said to me, 'You are dead to me. You shall receive nothing from my estate.'" The words hung in the air like thunder. Gasps rippled through the room, Rachel's face drained of color. What she whispered. David continued, unwavering. "My entire estate, valued at approximately $12 million, including the family home at 47 Magnolia Street, shall be given to the Parker Scholars Fund, a foundation created to provide educational opportunities for underprivileged students of Charleston. It is my wish that my life savings nourish the futures of those who might otherwise be forgotten." Silence. Rachel's chair scraped loudly against the floor as she pushed back, shaking her head violently. This isn't real. She wouldn't do this to me. I'm her daughter." Tom placed a hand on her arm, but she jerked it away. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pointed at David. "You manipulated her. You convinced her to cut me out." David's gaze was steady. Eleanor made this decision long before her final illness. She was of sound mind and heart. These were her wishes, Rachel. I am bound to honor them. Rachel collapsed back into her chair, her sobs echoing off the walls that had once held her childhood laughter. Around her, the room remained silent, the weight of Eleanor's choice pressing down on everyone present. For the first time in her life, Rachel understood words carry consequences. A single sentence spoken in anger had severed her from the inheritance she believed was hers by right. And yet beyond those walls in the years to come, students would walk into classrooms clutching scholarships that bore Eleanor's name. Futures would be reshaped, dreams revived, all because one woman chose to turn betrayal into a legacy of hope. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. The will had been read. The room emptied slowly, murmurs of shock trailing behind those who had gathered. Only Rachel remained slumped in the chair at the end of the table, her face blotched with tears. The echo of her mother's words, preserved forever in that legal document, clung to her like chains. For the first time in years, she felt small. Not the polished businesswoman she pretended to be, not the daughter who believed inheritance was her right, but the little girl who once whispered to her mama, "Don't leave me too." Tom tried to console her, but his words bounced off the wall of her grief. Eventually, even he left her to sit alone. A legacy larger than wealth. In the weeks that followed, the newspapers carried small stories about the Parker Scholars Fund. A few journalists highlighted Eleanor's quiet philanthropy, her decades of service as a teacher, and her final act of generosity that transformed her life savings into opportunity for others. Photographs appeared of smiling teenagers holding scholarship letters, their eyes filled with the same kind of hunger Eleanor had once seen in her classrooms. One boy, the son of a dock worker, told a reporter, "I never thought college was possible for me. Mrs. Parker changed my life." Rachel saw those stories. At first, bitterness twisted her stomach. That should have been mine, she thought. But then late one night, as she scrolled through another article, she paused at the picture of a young girl whose family had lost everything in a fire. The girl clutched her scholarship award with trembling hands. The caption read, "She can now pursue her dream of becoming a nurse thanks to the Parker Scholars Fund." Rachel stared at the girl's face for a long time. Something cracked inside her. For the first time, she saw her mother's choice, not as punishment, but as love redirected, confronting regret. Still, regret gnawed at her. She replayed her own words again and again. "You're dead to me." Each time they sounded harsher, uglier. Words she had thrown like daggers in a fit of anger now returned to pierce her own heart. Friends tried to comfort her. She was old-fashioned. You couldn't have changed her mind. But Rachel knew better. Her mother hadn't been stubborn. She had been steady. What Rachel mistook for weakness was actually strength. The kind of strength that quietly builds scholarships, that nurtures children, that holds fast to a home when everyone else sees only dollar signs. One Sunday, months after the funeral, Rachel drove past the old house on Magnolia Street. The shutters had been repainted. The porch swing had been repaired. A new family lived there now. 2 children chased each other across the lawn, their laughter spilling into the humid air. Rachel pulled over, resting her forehead against the steering wheel. She could almost hear her mother's voice, warm and gentle. "This house was never just wood and nails, Rachel. It was love." She wept there for a long time. The power of forgiveness. Forgiveness is a strange thing. It rarely arrives with trumpets or bright lights. It seeps in quietly like dawn pushing away the night. Rachel began writing letters. At first they were messy, half-finished apologies she tore up before sealing. "I'm sorry," Mom one began. "I didn't mean it," another said. None seemed enough. How could ink on paper undo years of distance, sharp words, and cold silences? But eventually she realized forgiveness was not about erasing the past. It was about refusing to let the past define the rest of her life. One evening she drove to Magnolia Cemetery, where Eleanor rested beside Mark. The air was thick with the smell of salt and magnolia blossoms. Rachel knelt at the grave, her voice breaking as she whispered, "I was wrong, Mama. I see it now. You weren't trying to hold me back. You were trying to hold me together." She laid a single lily on the grave, her tears falling freely. In that quiet space, she felt something lift a burden, a shame, a wall between them. She did not know if it was forgiveness from her mother or simply her own heart finally softening, but it was enough. Lessons from family betrayal. The Parker story spread beyond Charleston. People called it a tale of family betrayal, of a daughter who let ambition blind her to love, and of a mother who chose community over inheritance. But if you listened closely, you could also hear another melody woven through it, a melody of redemption, of second chances. Because family betrayal, as devastating as it can be, does not have to be the final note in the song. It can be the chord that pushes us to reflect, to change, to grow. Rachel could not undo what she had said, but she could choose how to live from that point forward. She began volunteering with the scholarship fund quietly, at first filing papers, helping with events. Over time, she told her story to the students, warning them not about money, but about the danger of words spoken in anger. "I lost more than an inheritance," she admitted. "I nearly lost the memory of who my mother truly was. Don't make the mistake I did." The students listened. Some nodded, understanding more than she expected. And in those moments, Rachel felt closer to Eleanor than she had in years. The timeless reminder. There is a Western proverb by George Eliot that says, "It is never too late to be what you might have been." Rachel clung to those words. They became her compass. She would never be able to reclaim the years of distance between her and Eleanor, but she could still become the daughter her mother deserved in her actions, in her service, in her humility. She learned that forgiveness is not a door someone else has to open for you. Sometimes it's a door you open yourself, stepping through into a life where regret is no longer your jailer, but your teacher. Closing thoughts for you. And now, dear friends, I want to turn this story back toward you. When was the last time you spoke harshly to someone you loved? Do you carry words you wish you could take back? Do you have unfinished business with a parent, a child, a sibling? Life is shorter than we think. Family betrayal leaves scars, but it does not have to define the rest of the story. Forgiveness, spoken or unspoken, has the power to transform bitterness into peace and regret into resolve. If you still have your parents, call them tonight. Don't wait until a lawyer reads a will to realize what you've lost. Say the words while you can. I love you. I'm sorry. I'm grateful. They may sound simple, but they can heal wounds deeper than you imagine. And if your parents are gone, carry their lessons forward. Live in a way that honors them. Remember, it is never too late to be what you might have been. So I leave you with this invitation. Take a deep breath. Think of the person you've drifted away from and ask yourself, what if today was the day you turned back toward them? If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need the reminder. Leave a comment below. When was the last time you said I love you to your parents? And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more Grandma True stories about love, loss, forgiveness, and the lessons hidden in every family betrayal.